Look, I've been replaying New Super Mario Bros. Wii recently, and don't get me wrong, it's a good game. But my god, I do not feel immersed as the main character here. I've always wanted to be a plumber that has the ability to fly and eat mushrooms, but this game doesn't let me live out my fantasy. It's everything I wanted it to be.
Who's ready to waggle? Motion controls, otherwise known as unnecessary, garbage, awful, gimmicky, casual. It's clear that motion controls have a certain reputation in the video game industry nowadays, with most people who declare themselves as hardcore gamers rejecting such an idea. No way they want to move while playing, are you a psychopath? Part of that is attributed to the adoption of motion in the 7th generation of consoles, with controllers like the Wii Remote and Kinect popularising whatever the hell this is. But before we start, let's define exactly what a motion controller is. You could technically argue that throwing a controller makes it a motion controller. It is in motion after all. So let's just say that a motion controller is any device that uses an input other than button presses, like motion, a camera, or humiliation. You'd think that would be obvious, but given how many different types of motion controllers there are, it was kind of necessary to put a label on all of these. So to fully uncover the history of motion, let's go back to the very beginning of time. The arcade era. Sega's arcade racing game Hang On debuted in arcades in 1985 and immediately set itself apart from the competition with these two love handles on the front. The game itself is a motorbiking racing game, either run out of time or complete 5 stages, then give us more money. Welcome to the arcade. But what's special about Hang On was its very obvious motorbike handles on the front. You have to physically tilt the handles and use the throttle to control the game, and this uniqueness likely led to the success of Hang On. Surprisingly, the controls actually worked well for motion controls in 1985. So naturally, seeing the success of motion-based control schemes, Sega tried to translate it into the home console market with the Sega Activator in 1993. That's more like it. The Activator tries to translate your physical movements into inputs, but it works about as well as you'd expect from an octagon lying on the ground in 1993. But you could argue that Nintendo had one of the first home motion controllers in 1985 with the NES Zapper. I love this thing. The idea that Nintendo would sell children firearms is both amazingly funny and absolutely horrifying. Its most famous use was in the NES pack entitled Duck Hunt, where players use the light gun to shoot ducks out of the air before they fly away, and if they fail, get laughed at by this dog. In my opinion, I think this guy's doing a little too much laughing for someone who doesn't have opposable thumbs. I'd like to see him try and shoot some ducks out of the air. Over the years, a few different companies would try their hands at motion-based controls in games, like PlayStation's EyeToy. Completely misunderstood this thing when I first saw it, immediately started sticking toys into my eyes. This is essentially just a webcam that came in a PlayStation 2 inspired shell, no other bells or whistles here. There's a blue standby light for when it's plugged in, and a red one for when you record with it. EyeToy fans really went wild when that was unveiled as a feature. In fact, EyeToy is so simple that you can use it as a webcam for your PC with little to no hassle. But it also means that it's fucking dreadful to use as a motion controller. The main games that required the EyeToy were the EyeToy Play series, a line of minigame compilations that basically just amounted to, put your hand here, now put it here. There's no technology to detect if you're moving or doing a certain action like in the Kinect, all it can really do is detect if there's an object on screen. The intro to EyeToy Play even reminds us of how basic EyeToy is by telling us exactly how to cheat. But of course, how could abusing the poorly designed hardware be fun? How is any of this fun? Most of the output for this thing was from Sony themselves, barely any third-party developers made games that required this thing. However, despite a limited number of games that required EyeToy, quite a few games were enhanced by EyeToy. If you remove the first E, the 2 N's, the C, the second E, and the D from that sentence, because all EyeToy enhancements can do is make me laugh. The only real enhancement that can come from using the EyeToy in your game is either by taking a picture of a player or shoehorning in some garbage minigames. There wasn't really a lot of potential for this accessory. Like I said, it was just a webcam. What can you really do with a webcam anyways? Display something phallic on Omegle?
Well, that was horrifying. It genuinely made me wish I couldn't see again. I only blind myself in one eye. We can thank the EyeToy for that battle. So I need to find something around here that can help me blind myself. Or
need to smash a TV and don't have a hammer on hand? Try the Wii Remote! Developed by Nintendo, the Wiimote's origins began back in 2001 as Nintendo began development on their next home console, the Nintendo Revolution. But instead of sporting a common man's controller, it used an object that defied the theory of evolution. A vertical design, 3 face buttons, no joystick and 1 trigger. I promise it shows up as one on the radar. The GameCube controller had 2 thumbsticks, analog triggers and a mole, but this thing? It has more in common with an original NES controller than a GameCube controller. Flip it on its side and you get 2 buttons on the right, a D-pad on the left and a start and select button. This thing is practically built for NES emulation. But the killer feature of the Wii Remote wasn't its lack of buttons, it was this ominous dark patch on the front. An optical sensor on the front of the remote allows it to detect light from the sensor bar, which allows for a pointer to appear on the screen. This is effectively a more modern version of the NES Zapper that would detect light from an old CRT television to figure out which document to shoot. The Wii Remote does the exact same thing, just with a sensor bar instead. The controller also, obviously, features an accelerometer to detect motion, which lets you perform various actions by shaking the controller. So, combining the fact that the controller has like 3 buttons and half a trigger, the console has about as much power as me banging 2 rocks together, and half of the advertisements look like this. Do you really think they built this thing for Call of Duty owners? The Wii marked a new era for motion controls as a whole. By lowering the overall power of the system and incorporating such a simple controller, more casual players could find themselves easily enjoying great Nintendo games on the Wii. And in my opinion, that's a great thing! It's awesome that this control set could make video games more easily understandable for those who don't usually play them. The best example has to be the Wii's bundle title, Wii Sports. If this game had been released on the GameCube, well, for one, it wouldn't be called Wii Sports, but it wouldn't have been able to utilise motion in the way that it did and thus wouldn't be as accessible to people. Like, imagine telling someone to hit A to swing the racket.
I just can't do it.
But aiming for casual players of the Wii also created an issue for motion. A bad image. Like, look at these people, that's not how you play God of War. People saw the exaggerated actions of Wii Sports and immediately shunned motion, branding anything Wii related as waggle. It was just a step too casual for them, which sucks because in some ways, motion can be better. Don't get me wrong, not in every case, but people have proven that technology like gyro can be used to make aiming on a controller far better. When playing through Breath of the Wild, I sometimes try turning off the gyro controls and just use the right stick and it felt like piss. There's no aim assist to compensate for only using a thumb to aim like in most modern shooter games, but by using gyro, I was able to use the full motion in my arms to aim, which feels a lot more natural. But I get it. Some people just can't get their head around it, some people just plain don't like it, and that's fine. I respect that. I just don't think there's anything wrong with having the option for motion controls built into modern controllers. But in 2010, if you owned a PS3 or Xbox 360 and didn't have a Wii, chances are you despised motion controls and wanted them nowhere near your special gaming box. So it's a real shame the executives did. PlayStation Move and Kinect for Xbox 360 were Sony and Microsoft's way of trying to break into the ground that the Wii had completely excavated. I mean, look at what happens when I draw a circle over the Wii remote. Now look at the PlayStation Move. It was pretty clear that this was Sony's way of trying to combat the Wii. I mean, when you see Nintendo go from this to this in a generation, you start frantically writing down whatever the fuck they just did. But to be fair to Sony, they were technically already on board with the 6-axis and DualShock 3 controllers. They both had motion detection in them, and carried that technology into the DualShock 4 and DualSense controllers. But we're not here to talk about practical uses of motion, we're here to talk about stupid uses of motion. I can use a PlayStation Move in an emergency situation as a flare, so that's one point away from the Wii remote. At first glance, the Move seems far more powerful and practical than the Wii remote. It has an actual trigger on the back, that'll finish off Nintendo for sure, but no matter how much technology gets packed into the remote, it's all pointless if it doesn't have any games that use it as well. So what kind of games actually required the PlayStation Move? Yeah, this isn't pretty. Overall, the Move sold around 50 million units until Sony stops updating sales figures in 2012, saying that the Move failed to meet expectations. But, to be fair, can you really consider this a failure of a controller? Plenty of PS4 games released at least offered support for the Move. Dreams is a game creation tool that's greatly enhanced by using the Move, which was released in 2020, 10 years after the Move initially launched. PlayStation VR used the Move as its primary control method throughout its entire life. So, did Move fail? Not really. While it may not have been the groundbreaking success that Sony wanted it to be, the Move was still supported up until the PS5 and enjoyed a long life, a life extended by serving as VR controllers. Now Kinect on the other hand, Kinect. Where do I even begin? Well, a good place to start might be the beginning ideas of Kinect in 2005. Microsoft were interested in developing a 3D camera for the Xbox, but since the technology wasn't quite there yet, they placed the Kinect in the Boneyard, a codename for ideas they wanted to develop in the future, but couldn't currently due to lack of refinement in current tech. With a name like Boneyard, you think the Kinect would stay there, but unfortunately for everyone, Microsoft lifted the Kinect out of the Boneyard in 2009, officially revealing Project Natal in E3 2009. Microsoft confirmed it wouldn't release until after 2009, but there were a number of games shown, including a version of Burnout Paradise that supported Project Natal. Ultimately, Project Natal was renamed to Kinect and given a November 4th release date at E3 2010, alongside a new, slimmer version of the Xbox 360 that didn't completely break down when it got a little hot. Now all this seems good, the Kinect doesn't make you hold a controller to use motion, it's far more advanced than anything Sony and Nintendo were doing with remotes. It sounds great. Sure, the games for it are quite family orientated, but come on. Everyone who was buying a 360 for games like Halo or Call of Duty already bought one. It's probably about time to bring in an audience that plays more casual games and then move on from Kinect into the 8th generation. They brought the Kinect with them into the 8th generation. Everything about this is unnecessary, garbage, awful, gimmicky, I do not like Kinect 2.0 at all. Don't get me wrong, as a Kinect it's a massive improvement over the last generation model. It has a 1080p camera, it can track 6 people at a time instead of just 4. The only problem is that it's a Kinect in 2013. People were ready to move on, but Xbox apparently weren't. Kinect 2.0 also featured voice commands to do things like turn your Xbox on, get it to launch games, or turn other people's Xboxes off. But to do this, Microsoft required that the console was always connected to the internet, or at least phones home every 24 hours. Now I find it kind of ironic that people were worried about the console being always on and always connected to the internet, but nowadays it's the norm to leave a console in rest mode or sleep mode whenever it's not on, but there's definite concerns of leaving a device in your home that always connects to the internet with a microphone. Like look, I said I could really go for an onion rice about now in front of my Alexa and it force-fed me Warioware. People were upset and outraged. The same people who didn't like Kinect but already owned Xbox 360s no longer wanted to buy an Xbox One. They saw the casual, gimmicky controls of Kinect games and decided that any sort of motion feature in a controller is a gimmick. Across 8th gen, Sony included motion in their DualShock 4 controller, but it wasn't front and centre. There was a PlayStation camera, but again, this wasn't the focus of their console. The focus of the PS4 was connecting with others across gaming. The focus of the Xbox One was ruining a brand name as much as possible.
So, what did we learn? I feel like motion is a pretty hugely misunderstood control type in gaming. Most people say how they don't want to wave their whole body around to control the game, but motion like that is usually found in VR games. It's very rare that you see that in a standard video game nowadays. But overall, pretty good story. I enjoyed all the plot twists. Next up on my reading list is the Weekly Warrior Special Edition. God damn it, it's always listening.